Thank you. I'm happy to be here with all of you, and I'm particularly gratified that I heard so many states that are Complete College America Alliance of state members around the table. Just about everybody here is in a state that's part of our alliance of states, and that's just excellent for me to see the interest from the states that we're working like this. I want to talk about the need for the completion agenda quickly, and then what Complete College America is doing, and then strategies, followed by much more in-depth in performance funding and how it's rolling out nationally and different components and principles used in it. With many of you being in Complete College America states, you may have seen our information before, or so many of you are on education committees, you've probably seen a lot of this as well. But we have a completion issue in the United States, the issue being that we need many more degrees and certificates of value in our population to keep up with the needs of the workplace. By the end of this decade, for instance, 60% of jobs are estimated to require a college education. Currently, the unemployment rate for adults with just high school diplomas is twice that for those with college degrees. Currently, 70% of recent graduates from high school start their education or training within 2 years of high school, which has increased massively over the years. This is a huge proportion of students that go on. But of those, just over half actually complete something within 6 years. Now, some will go on beyond the 6 years to complete, but that's time that's lost and money that's spent when they could be in the workplace, and many of them never will complete in the end anyway. This is particularly a problem for low-income students, and I don't have a similar slide for community college students, but this one is something that I look at a lot because it focuses me on why I do what I do and why we would do what we do at Complete College America. If you look at the bachelor's degree attainment by income quartile, you can see that only 10% or almost 11% of the students or the young adults from the bottom income quartile will finish a bachelor's degree, whereas at the top 80% are. Wouldn't it be great to have everybody at 80% or at least 60%? And the share then of bachelor's degrees is also very much skewed toward the upper income level. So this is an increasing but ongoing issue that we've got to work at, and that's what we spend our time working on. Complete College America was founded in 2009. We work with states to increase the number of students successfully completing degrees and certificates of value and close the attainment gaps for underrepresented populations. We work with what we call an alliance of states. To become a member of our alliance of states, a state commits to state and campus completion goals, commits to measuring progress and success via common completion measures, and our common completion measures are shared with the National Governors Association and their Complete to Compete initiative. And states need to commit to high-impact, large-scale strategies. We want to get beyond pilot phases for things at work. We want to take those statewide and have the most impact we can on students. We currently have 33 member states. We've added 3 recently, 2 plus the District of Columbia. So I was also happy to hear that nobody was here from the states that I don't have turned blue yet, because I haven't been able to do that, and I don't have to apologize to anyone. But we have been very pleased with the interest at the state government level in Complete College America, and enjoy working with everyone in the executive, legislative, and at the college and university levels. Well, we work on about 7 strategies with the states in our alliance, and performance funding is one of them, but it's not the only one, and that's one thing I want to emphasize today. We do think it's important. We do think every state should move in the direction of funding outcomes, but there are also other things that need to be done. One of the underlying is to collect and report common metrics. We are working in many states on transformation of remediation, on acceleration. I noted the statistic of the proportion of students getting through in 6 years. Can we get them through faster? What can we do with the structure of the courses, with taking into account training or education that they have had previously? How can we roll together remediation and regular credit-bearing courses? How can we get the education to the students in a more timely way? Now, the assessing and counting certificates, that's an important thing to us. We say complete college, and I've been discussing with my colleagues over here this morning the issue of college. We're looking at post-secondary. When you think college, don't just think bachelor's degree. We're thinking about certificates of economic value as well, and getting students into and through those, because those are such an important stepping stone either into the workplace or into further education. But I want to emphasize the bottom, that none of these strategies is going to take care of the issues by itself. Just like infinite amount of funding is not going to fix problems either. You'll often hear, well, if we just had more money, we could fix it. But if you look at the statistics, you'd have to ask yourself, well, this is the way the system is developed over time, and these are the portions of students that are completing, so is it more money? Yeah, more money would be good. It would help implement the other things, but certainly not the only thing. Outcome funding has really taken off recently. There are about 10 states that have it in place right now, some very recent. In Illinois, for instance, this was the first year that they had it in place. Some have had it in place longer. Indiana has had it in place longer than many. Ohio has a longer history still, but has changed its formula. But the states that aren't in performance funding right now, that aren't doing it, many of them are thinking about it. Many of them have legislation passed to implement it and are working on committees or working with their campuses to put that together. Some others are still discussing it, and some aren't doing anything about it yet. So what's different about this? Because it's not a new thing. Performance funding's been tried in the past. Well, there were some issues in the past that we think that we've gotten beyond with new structures and data systems and principles to develop the funding. First of all, what some people call performance funding 1.0 provided for bonuses or add-ons, didn't touch the base. And in addition to that, provided small amounts of funding. So if you got 99% of your funding through an enrollment-driven or base plus budget, and you had 1% add-on if you were going to meet particular goals, the incentive wasn't there. There wasn't enough of incentive. The enrollment, which is important, but not the only thing. The enrollment overpowered everything else that was of value in the formulas. Also, the performance funding 1.0 tended to disappear. And you look at what's going on with budget cuts and you think, okay, 99% of my budget is base plus or enrollment driven. 1% is based on performance. If I've got to have a 1% cut, performance has got to go. If I have to have a 10% cut, of course performance has got to go. I'm not going to stick with the base as much as I can. And I'm hoping that Jason talks about Indiana's approach to that, because they had a very interesting opportunity to employ performance funding even in instances of budget cuts several years ago. Also, under performance funding 1.0, the data systems weren't developed as well as they are now. And listening to the committees that you're on and the other jobs that you have, those who aren't legislators, you know what's happening with longitudinal data systems and our ability to find students, to watch their progress, to see what their characteristics were, to see what their course taking was, the number of credits they generated. All that goes into formulas now in a way that are much better than the former blunt instruments of how many completions were there. So we can do much better in design now than we did in the past. So I want to talk about principles, what Complete College America considers good principles, good practices in putting together performance funding systems. And there is a document in front of you on the tables that walks through these steps as well. But I want to put together the states that are working on this right now to give some good examples for you. So one of the first things to think about, and something to think about when people say, I don't want to do performance funding, our budgets have been cut 10, 15, 25%. Well, everything is performance funding. You're already funding something. Either you're funding enrollments or you're funding the status quo. What you've got to think about is, am I funding what the state considers the most important goals for post-secondary education? What we're looking for now in the new performance funding formulas is more educational outcomes. That's the predominant objective in the performance funding. Enrollment has to be a part. You never want to lose access, and I will reiterate that we don't want to lose the access function of the institutions in any respect, but we've got to be looking at moving those students along, because leaving students with debt and no certificate or degree is not beneficial to them. The first thing you'll need to do is to get agreement on goals. And again, listening from the states around the table, I know that many of you already have a public agenda of some sort. You've put together a plan that the state has based its higher education policies and funding on, and Texas is closing the gaps. Tennessee, Complete College Tennessee, Oklahoma, Reach Higher, formerly Brain Gain. But you've got to put together a public agenda. If you don't have goals that everybody agrees upon, you're going to run into trouble. You're going to have people saying, that's your goal, not my goal. Our institutional goal is this. You've got to align the institution goals with the state goals. You need to have fairly broad performance metrics. The bottom line, if you want to increase completions, is the increase in the number of degrees and certificates awarded. But you want to go beyond that, because you want to take into account the different institutional missions. You don't want to force onto your research institutions what the community colleges are working on, and you don't want to try to make your community colleges work toward the goals of the research institutions, for instance. So you want degrees, you want certificates, you also want to look at the other aspects of university missions. Research expenditures, for instance. Several states look at research expenditures, either externally funded or total research expenditures, whenever they put together their formulas. You might want to focus on particular occupational outcomes that you're looking for, STEM degrees, for instance, healthcare degrees, and then workforce areas with high occupational needs, particularly at the community college level. Workforce training, short-term certificates, things that connect directly to employers quickly, places where community colleges excel, those should be in the formulas as well. But you don't want to make it too broad. There are models in the past that have contributed to their own failure by putting in too many things. If you end up with 25 or 30 different metrics, it's unclear what the goals of the state are. The institutions are pursuing their own interests more than the state interests whenever you add that many goals or that many components to a formula. Formulas tend to add things over time, which can be good, but you ought to think about subtracting at the same time as you add new ones. The bottom line is you've got to set the goals in the public agenda, fix those as the priorities, and build the outcomes that you want to reward around that. I mentioned this already, but want to emphasize it some more. Mission differentiation matters in performance funding formulas. You don't want all your institutions chasing the same thing. That is a common problem, particularly with research funding, because institutions and faculty want to research in their fields. It's natural. That's why you get into it. That's why you want to do it. But not every institution can put together the research structure to carry out research at a level that will allow them to have external funding. And when you don't do that, you start drawing resources away from the educational mission of the institution. So that's been a particular area of which institutions are you funding for research. Another one has been enrollment. Indiana is an interesting example. I worked there for 6 years in different things over time, different occupations within higher education. And at one point we had Purdue main campus and IU Bloomington getting enrollment funding. Well, they were huge campuses, and that lowered the standards of their admission because they were trying to get those enrollment dollars, and a lot of the students could have been served better elsewhere. Again, getting them in the door is one thing, getting them to completion is a different thing, and a lot of the students weren't ready. But you need to differentiate based on the mission. So, for instance, community colleges offer a lot of dual enrollment. We want to combine preparation of the high school students with entrance and progression through their collegiate careers, so you might want to consider dual enrollment. Community colleges have a focus on basic skills and adult education. Reward them for that, for the successful completion. Again, not just the enrollment, but for moving those students on to the credential that they're looking for. You can't lose sight of access, but you shouldn't just settle for enrollment. And you shouldn't have to. You've got to avoid cherry picking the students, and this gets to a slide further on. If you emphasize rates, institutions are bound to say, well, I know how to raise my rate, I'm going to pick better students. Better students graduate at higher numbers. You need to avoid that. That restricts access. So don't lose access. So what do states do to address this? A lot of them have extra weight in their formulas for at-risk students. Low-income students, particularly Pell eligible or state aid eligible, are a component of almost all of the new formulas. Adult students, we've got to encourage adult students to get back into the workforce through their training, through looking at what they've done in the past, what skills they have, and putting together schedules that work for them. But we need to incentivize institutions to pick up those adult students and find the right strategies to get them through. The academically at risk students, did they start in remedial education? That's a common one as well. And part-time students, what kind of incentives can we fund to move part-time students through? Because part-time enrollment is a pretty clear indicator of either very long collegiate career or a career that ends in no credential. You've got to reward progress as well as the outcomes. A lot of states are moving toward things called momentum points, or rewarding students for progressing along a category. This is important for two reasons. One, because if you just said certificates and degrees are what we're going to be funding from this point forward, you won't see the results from whatever you're doing to increase the certificate and degree completion for several years. So you can put together a formula and say, we're going to make this 100% increase in certificates and degrees. Well, you know, for the first 4, 5, 6 years, you're probably not going to see much on that because you've got a pipeline of students who are what they are and where they are. So you need to have some intermediate steps, but you also want to reward them for progressing students through their careers. So a number of states are going to a reward for completion of 24, 48, or 72 credit hours, or 15 or 30 credit hours. These are things that research shows help students progress quickly and quickly toward their degree without as much stop out and without wasted credits. We also have things like, did you complete your remedial courses? Did you succeed in what we call gateway courses, the first English or math that you've had to take? And reward institutions for getting students through those courses, because that's where you lose a lot of the students. In doing this, you've got to make the metrics difficult to gain. Formulas need to be simple and transparent. The more complex they are, the more difficult it is to explain them to people, the more difficult it is to understand, and the more components there are that might have results that you weren't expecting. One way to do this is to use numbers, not rates. If you've worked in even the high school graduation rate, let alone some of the other aspects of educational attainment, you know that what's in the denominator matters a lot, and what you exclude can change the outcome that you're showing. But we want more degrees and certificates. We'd like a high completion rate, but we also want to make sure that the degrees and certificates are what we measure, not just the rates. So you need to test the metrics that you're using and think about, how would I game this if I were an institution? Well, let's not call it game, that's pejorative. Let's just say, how would I maximize my potential payout from this? And is that the behavior that the state wants? Does the state want, for instance, institutions to become very selective so that they have a high graduation rate? Well, no, you don't want to constrict access. So you've got to look at what might happen. Another instance is the research funding that I mentioned. Do you want every institution to conduct research? Well, at some level, yes, because faculty need to do that and students need to do it as well. It's part of the education. Does everybody need to build labs that allow them to pursue NIH grants? Not unless your state has infinite resources. So you've got to limit who's able to participate in some of that funding as well. Another thing you've got to keep in mind is not shooting for predetermined levels of performance. If you say we want everybody to get to a 55% graduation rate, Well, maybe they'll stop there. Or we want everybody to add 100 new graduates a year up to 500 graduates after 5 years and stop there. We don't really want to stop there. You want to start from where the institution is, and you want to look at year-over-year change, year-over-year improvement. The amount of funds has got to matter, and this has been an issue in the performance funding 1.0 that I mentioned at the beginning, but it's also an issue in every state that takes up this challenge. Some of the states are at 100% performance. Some of the states are not. Legislation that mentions a number has been around 25% in recent legislation that's passed. Indiana doesn't have a particular figure that I can recall, but Jason can correct me when he gets up here. But they're at 5 to 6%. Illinois is at less than 1%. I came from Illinois to this position, and I think 1% is not enough to move. And it was an elegant formula. It is an elegant formula. It's a good formula, but if it's less than 1%, it doesn't matter. So you've got to experiment as a state, but you've got to think about making it matter. You've got to make all the parts of the model align with your state goals. If you are going to use enrollment-based calculations, you should look at completed credits, not enrollment in the first day or the first 7 days or whatever your census date is. In Base Plus, if you stick with Base Plus, you should put new funds into the performance funding formula. And, again, enough to make it matter. That's a proposal that Missouri has underway right now. And over time, you've got to increase the share of the state allocation. Some last issues for implementation. We would say don't wait for new money. If these are the state goals, these are the state goals. Why wouldn't you want to fund the state goals at this point? You do not want to harm the institutions in any way, so a phase-in is appropriate. You don't want to go from 0 to 100% based on performance. You don't want to go from 0 to 25 in 1 year. You probably want to go something like 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. Again, the institutions need predictability, need to have time to implement the changes that are going to make the performance funding work for them to reach the state goals. Also, continuing the performance funding. This is an issue with the performance funding 1.0 that I mentioned, that the states gave it up whenever times got tough. But if these are the state goals, why would you give them up when times are tough? That's when you would focus on the state goals. Finally, again, to reiterate, this is only one tool. We believe in performance funding. We advocate. We work with states to implement it. But it's not the only thing. It's part of a package. So you've got to look at the entire package as you're trying to move your numbers.